Hello and welcome everyone, we Weeb online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Was the Storm God part 3. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
3 months after the first set of returning refugees staggers into Uzushio, they have their first true face-to-face meeting. Not glowing eyes in the darkness, not scary whispers and shadowy people with the dim dark of a sewer around them. There are many people in the village today, and Naruto walks among them and knows them. He recalls them, a girl who used to sell flowers at the fountain in front of the administrative center, now with more white than brown hair. An old man, barely able to walk without assistance but keen of mind and tongue, who once worked the mission assignment desk and looks at Arashi, Naruto. He's Naruto now in this life, more or less, with almost desperate eyes. He previously carried a small boy on his shoulders, and now he has his own children. At his inauguration, a woman, bent with age, who was once a kid, hid behind her parents' robes. And they know him, have known him since they first set foot in Uzushio again, and Naruto will never forget him. An old man with once blue hair that has turned snowy white with age. A Suo who taught him how to throw a senbon as a child, making his slow and careful way down the ship's ramp to the newly rebuilt dock. Suo Tomi, who always had a harsh word of advice and a moment to spare for answering even the most trivial of questions, had paused with both feet on solid ground, and Naruto had stepped forward, his heart in his throat. "I saw you," Tomi murmured, his voice creaking with age but his gaze fixed, leaning against a pillar as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. There was grief in his eyes, as well as hope and an aching, ripping need to believe. "I swear I saw you fall, Arashi-kun, before the gods themselves." Naruto had taken another step, and another, until he was near enough to wrap a strong, young hand, too young for the agony in his chest, too young for the sadness in his heart, around an unbent shoulder. "Not forever," he'd said, meeting the man's gaze. "Didn't you always say that Uzushio will never fall, not with even one soul holding her?" And Tomi had grinned, like a steadfast stone unaffected by the passage of time. He'd returned the clap by saying, "We did, and a soul like yours is a fierce thing indeed, Uzuki-sama." There was no cheer from the ship behind them, no flood of voices, only a whisper, a fleeting and powerful stirring just beneath the surface, like the retreat of seas before a tsunami. People mumbled to one another, "Uzushio. Home." So there are people, both old and new, and when Naruto goes among them, they murmur Arashi-sama and yondaime to him and grin with their hearts in their eyes. And it's good. Because Uzushio is rebuilding around him, rising from the ruins with the help of many hands, and it relieves the anguish in his chest that he's had for as long as he can remember. But he's more than just Arashi. He's had another life mold him as well, and all he has to do is look at Gaara, steadfast, unyielding, his right hand as Haku's left, to remember that. It only takes channeling chakra and seeing the spiral seal, so simple but so complicated, come to life to recall what it is that distinguishes him now. The Kyuubi, not his status as the village's genius orphan, the next greatest Uzumaki, or the unshakable backing of an entire community. A demiurge. Sometimes they murmured in Konoha, demon brat. Nobody was ever outright abusive to him, and no one ever touched him, but that was worse. The murmurs never stopped, despite the fact that a strike might have. Naruto realizes who he is. He recalls Mito and a few others, 9 sacrifices for 9 Biju, and their chakra and heart strength. And he stares at himself, then at Gaara, and wonders what went wrong. Gaara's seal is shaky, the Ikigai is riding too close to the surface, and Naruto's lost Konoha has yondaime his life, but those are factors beyond their control. Being despised for that is akin to being loathed for the color of his hair or skin. He counts 7 more as he steps outside Uzushio's gates at dawn. Gaara is 1 step behind, grim and vivid in the dawning light, even though he's been dressed down to assist with the reconstruction. Haku is just within the gates, looking dissatisfied, but Naruto won't allow him be there. Not with all the things that could go wrong. Not with the amount of power they're likely to wield. There are 7 of us, and I'm sure our situations are at least similar. Naruto is not without flaws, but cowardice is not one of them. And now, with so much riding on him, so many people relying on him, how can he turn down an opportunity like this? It could hurt them, but it could also help them, because Naruto is certain that Kiri is still a threat, and that another country will consider Uzushio as easy prey. They are still a little village, and they are vulnerable. Naruto, on the other hand, will not allow Uzushio fall again. The northeast coast of Whirlpool Country is a desolate, rocky landscape inhabited only by the most tenacious fishermen and a few dispersed humans. Naruto leads Gaara here, picking his way past weather-worn stones and storm-tossed driftwood until they reach the land's edge, where it drops into the sea. The wind is still night cool off the lake, and a few scattered clouds cling to the lightening horizon. But there is no other life from the cliff to the edge of the woodland behind them. Naruto takes a calm, deep breath and hops to the top of the nearest boulder, sitting cross-legged. "Are you ready?" he asks Gaara, who nods once and touches the side of his gourd. Naruto gives him a bright and bold smile and shuts his eyes, letting the outside world fade away. It's a wide and black tunnel, like the one going to Uzushio's heart, with seals that flicker and flare on the walls that meets him. He takes a time to examine them, mostly modest genjutsus held in place by fuinjutsu to make them endure longer and be more potent, all aimed at mental serenity and heart peace. Sihara-sensei used to refer to them as mood modifiers. Influences are more powerful than attacks, and there are a lot of them, each one slightly different but all following a similar concept. Still, the existence of this place is a promising omen. Naruto smiles and walks down the hall, past the large double doors at the end. This location appears to be the Uzushio's heart, a well-kept secret, something to safeguard, something to help him save his village. He pushes open the doors and steps into the cool white light of the circular room, laughing gently because he isn't the 12-year-old he should be right now. His hands are his own, the ones he recalls from his previous life, even down to the scar on his palm from Fuyu's training, which has never disappeared. His hair hangs over his shoulders like a familiar weight, bright blonde faded pale by the sun, and his Hirai-8 is wrapped around his head. Without looking, Naruto knows what the symbol will be, the proper one, and he loves Konoha as well, but not in the way that Uzushio does. There's a sound in the darkness, and as he glances up from his hands, he sees keen eyes watching him, as well as a large shape curled inside the shadows. As the Kyuubi raises himself to his feet, Naruto can just make out the whisper of Nine Tails over the stone. "You're not that brat?" The Kyuubi growls, his pupils constricted. "What is your name?" "But I am," Naruto corrects, his heart pounding like a tattoo in his neck. "I'm more myself than I've been in 12 years, and you're the Kyuubi. Mito-sama never spoke much of you." That elicits a loud, snarling laugh from him as the Kyuubi emerges from the shadows. Naruto stands firm, his feet planted and his gaze fixed on the Biju, the greatest of the 9. "Of course she didn't," the fox scoffs, circling Naruto in a tight circle, never getting closer than the stone's outermost ring. "Why bring up a burden, a prisoner? Why bring up the one she enslaved?" Given their physical disparity, Naruto meets the Kyuubi's gaze as squarely as he can. He knows the story better than anyone else. Because Mito was one of Uzushio's, everyone did. If she hadn't, Madara would have continued to rule you, he adds softly but forcefully. He would have used you to destroy Konoha, and then he'd most likely moved on to all the other villages. "You think that matters to me?" roars the fox, lunging forward only to be stopped by the pale gray floor, which flashes with light and holds him back. Naruto remains still. "I believe it should," he answers calmly. "It would have simply increased hatred and terror." The fox scoffs and resumes its round. "You say it as if I don't have hatred for you small humans," he yells. "Humanity is a disease. If I had my way, I'd annihilate you all." Naruto inhales deeply, closes his eyes, and exhales gently. "I used to despise the people of Konoha," he admits quietly, something he's never told anybody else. "But hatred is so dark. If I hate, and they hate, there's never a chance for anything different. Only more and more hatred, piling up on top of itself. I don't want to hate people, and I don't want to hate you. You're the strongest of the Biju, and older than I can imagine. You must be so wise, and I'm not. I'm just human. But I want to protect those precious to me. And I think," grins because he can see a future of peace, hope, and home. And whether the Kyuubi aids him or not, that's what he'll always strive for. "I'm Naruto," he adds, extending his hand across the huge chasm that separates them. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki, or Arashi if you choose." There's a long pause before a piercing snort breaks the silence. Storm or fishcake, no third option. And Naruto chuckles, dazzling in the soft darkness, and steps forward with a smile towards his personal demon. His hope for the future of his people. Yaoko is bright and curious, and he is definitely restrained, yet his eyes are bright and his smile genuine as they stroll through the market. Sasuke isn't sure why he's still here, given that he obtained the intel he came for, and Yaoko does indeed have a complete ANBU unit following him. At the same time, he is acutely aware. Yaoko is an instant and existing connection to Naruto, but Sasuke has spent years chasing half-formed ghosts, and half-hearted whispers. Ah, the blonde moans as they take a few steps back from the press and lean against the wall together. I'd forgotten what it's like to be somewhere other than Uzushio. Sasuke scans the throng, attempting to see what Yaoko does but failing. Different, he wonders after a time, as this is yet another connection to Naruto. If he hasn't been home in nearly 7 years, his new community must be ... easy to adore. Yaoko tilts his head back, bells quietly ringing, with a deep, meditative hum. It's beautiful, he adds slowly, the curve of his smile visible despite the mask. Our shot aim raised the land that Uzushio is on from the sea, and then pulled most of the stone for the buildings right from the ground. He and a handful of others made the city with chakra, pulled it together in the space of a month, and it's ... easy to tell. He laughs, and Sasuke can hear it in his voice. He doesn't understand anything, but he can hear it clearly. Yaoko extends his hand in front of them, encompassing the market and the streets beyond, and says, Konoha is ... busy. There's so much life here, and Uzushio is comparable. But different, too. Smaller, definitely, and the air feels funny here in comparison. Just, Konoha is green and brown, earth tones, whereas Uzushio is blue and crimson and gold, sea and sky and sunset. Sasuke doesn't get it. I'm not sure what it means to talk about a location with such obvious affection. He likes Konoha, he enjoys it as a place to live and grow, and he'll fight to the death for it, but that's more for the people who live there. Yaoko speaks of Uzushio as if the village were a person worth defending and cherishing. He's considered leaving before, just getting up and going out the gates, dismissing everyone here and setting out on his own to locate Naruto, or, in his darker moments, his brother. Konoha has no permanent attachments, no unbreakable relationships. It's Sasuke's village, his home, and he takes delight in it, but not nearly as much as Yaoko does in his own village in the span of a few lines. Before he can say anything, a familiar chakra whisper hits his senses, and he looks across the bustling market to see his first teacher emerge from the crowd. Yaoko becomes very still and slightly tense beside him, which Sasuke assumes is understandable. After all, the majority of foreign shinobi have dreams of Kakashi of the Sharingan approaching them, and Yaoko stated that everyone in Uzushio is a returned refugee from somewhere else, so it's plausible that Yaoko has crossed swords with Kakashi before. Kakashi makes a show of glancing around before finding them, but Sasuke is no longer a stupid 12-year-old genin, and he doesn't believe him for a second. Kakashi is an expert at playing the fool, but beneath the surface, he's astute, cunning, and powerful enough to be one of Konoha's most powerful weapons. Having the man teach him what he knows about the Sharingan, and showing that the perverted, perpetually late man possesses a Mangekyo Sharingan in the process, opens Sasuke's eyes to that reality very swiftly. Yo, the copy nin exclaims cheerfully as he approaches, waving his hand lazily. Are you entertaining our visitor, Sasuke? Sasuke says, folding his arms across his chest and narrowing his gaze at his former Jounin instructor, guessing the purpose for his arrival. After all, Kakashi has been almost as obsessed with locating Naruto as he has. He couldn't have missed the connection with Uzushio. Kakashi gives him a long, penetrating look, then turns one eye on the blonde nin, crinkled in a fake smile. Kakashi, he says cheerfully. Greetings from Konoha. There's a brief pause, just long enough to be noticed, before the other shinobi tilts his head. Uzumaki Yaoko, he replies softly. Your ... son. Sakumo's. Kakashi remains very still and very quiet. He doesn't say anything, but his phony smile fades, leaving a nervous watchfulness in his visible eye. Sasuke, for his part, is both wary and amazed. 4 words and half a moment of thought to throw one of Konoha's greatest off balance. That's a really effective war strategy. Yaoko folds his arms and tucks his hands into the sleeves of his deep green kimono top, as if he doesn't care about anything. Although he's a shinobi, he's most certainly carrying weapons in there and is aware of the hazardous terrain he's walked on. That's not the first thing most people say, Kakashi adds quietly and slowly. Yaoko's eyes wrinkle slightly as he inclines his head, the bells quietly ringing with the movement. I'm older than I look, he says. I met him several times, and no matter what people say, he was a terrific man, very strong, and our Sandame liked him. That relieves some of the stress in Kakashi's shoulders, but not much. Uzumaki Arashi, my father mentioned him, acknowledges the copy nin with a modest nod. After a pause and a beat, he visibly uncoils, apparently forcing himself to relax, and the ridiculous eye smile returns. I like your mask, Ma. Sasuke's face collides with his hand, forcing him to suppress a groan. Yaoko, thankfully, merely rolls with the rather unsubtle change of subject, though an amused smirk curls his lips. "Thank you," he says, mockingly. "Yours is also quite good. I considered bandages, but they don't have the right flair." Kakashi smiles at him, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I was on my way to lunch," he says pleasantly. "Would you two mind joining me?" Sasuke's stomach selects that time to remind him that he skipped dinner yesterday night in order to visit the bar, and breakfast this morning in order to escape Ino and Sakura's grasp. It lets out a thunderous rumbling, but Sasuke seems unfazed, striding past Kakashi's idiotic snickers with his head held high. "You're going to pay," he says, leaping to the rooftop in a single bound. The sound of bells follows as Yaoko copies him, and Sasuke wonders how the man can ever win a fight with those things revealing every move he makes. Maybe he's just fast enough that it doesn't matter, but it still seems like a danger. After all, there's always someone faster. "Ramen?" Kakashi asks, joining them on the tiles and leaving without waiting for a response. Sasuke rolls his eyes, knowing it wasn't a suggestion at all, but rather a deliberate decision to choose the cheapest option available, and follows. After a brief period, Yaoko joins him, thoughtfully silent, his gaze fixated on Kakashi's back, and Sasuke is intrigued by the history there. With Kakashi's reaction, there must be something, but he's never heard anyone directly discuss Kakashi's father. Headache isn't a common family name, and the only other application Sasuke can think of is Headache Tsukumo, Konoha's White Fang. But Sasuke knows nothing about him and nothing about his family. Of then, Sasuke had never heard of a hidden village in Whirlpool Country until yesterday, so he suspects he's deficient in certain areas of his knowledge. But he's not going to ask. Kakashi is confusing. He remembers, a month and a half after Naruto's disappearance, that he played a prank. It was an impulse, a crazy idea, but the woman who was his target had always been especially rude to Naruto when they pulled weeds for her, bringing Sakura and Sasuke cookies and lemonade and conveniently forgetting the blonde, ignoring him and sneering when she thought Kakashi wasn't watching. He'd ended up in a tree on the outskirts of town, huddled deep in the branches and shaking like he'd never shaken from a mission before. Shaking and fighting laughter, because what the hell was he doing? He, Uchiha Sasuke, youngest son of the Uchiha clan head and self-proclaimed avenger, had played a prank, and he'd enjoyed it. It had been fulfilling. Something had moved above him, but he hadn't raised his head from his arms. Kakashi hadn't looked at him, hadn't taken his gaze away from his book. But he'd whispered, "Do you recall when I said my closest friend's name was on the memorial?" Sasuke had turned away, certain that this was going to be a lecture or another attempt at sympathy. His name was Uchiha Abido, and he was stupid, always late, always giving the most ludicrous reasons as though we couldn't see straight through them. That had caused Sasuke to gaze at him, his heart in his throat once more, and he'd attempted to gulp it down enough to speak, but ... that was good. More than great, because he couldn't find the words anyhow. Uchiha, he'd finally questioned, and Kakashi having one Sharingan made terrible, horrible sense at the time. Kakashi had nodded, not looked him in the eyes, but replied with a distinct smile, even through the mask, "Yes, Abido." And maybe it wasn't good, maybe it wasn't even better, but it was enough for the time being. A recollection, a reminder, and just enough. From what Naruto can tell, Kakashi hasn't altered much. He's still relaxed and attentive, his visible eye sharp underneath his heavy-lidded aloofness. Tsukumo was never like that, at least not the few times Naruto encountered him as Arashi. The elder Headache was driven, fierce, and focused, and he never tried to conceal it. His son, on the other hand, hides, buries, and conceals, to the point where Naruto wonders if even Kakashi understands what's a mask and what isn't. He regrets having to include Tsukumo in the situation, because he's studied the records and learnt what happened and how it clearly affected Kakashi. But, of all the individuals in Konoha, Kakashi has the best chance of figuring out who Yaoko is, and even who Arashi is. For all of Kakashi's pretending to be a good-for-nothing pervert, he's actually rather frightening. When Kakashi becomes serious, Tsukumo has nothing on him, and he is distrustful of everyone, of every minor blunder or even of every correct step. Always on the lookout for betrayal or ill play from anyone he doesn't consider a friend. Naruto cannot take that chance at this time. Not in this case. Certainly not with Sasuke. Naruto interrupts his thought and looks at his friend. Truly, his friend, and he knows it now. I've been seeking for him since he went missing 7 years ago. Sasuke has been seeking for him, attempting to find him, even risking offending a foreign envoy to gain his answers, because Naruto saw that moment of barely contained rage when he first refused to speak. Just a half second of tenseness, a flash of rage, but but it was present. But Sasuke is concerned, and this causes something in Naruto's chest to flip and whirl in light, breathless loops. He'd imagined they wouldn't miss him when he departed. He wasn't so wrapped up in sorrow or self-pity that he imagined they wouldn't notice, but he'd expected it to be less significant in their views than other things, like rebuilding or appointing their next Kage, or, well, most things. Iruka was valuable but always busy. The Sandaime was gone. Kakashi was friendly but aloof. Sakura had never seemed to care. No matter how much he wanted, she did. And Sasuke. Well, Sasuke was Sasuke, and all the Twilight meetings, missions, and monsters they battled together couldn't pierce his armor. But, presumably, Naruto's departure was. It makes sense, doesn't it? To be closer to his teammate. All he had to do was relocate to the opposite side of the continent with no intention of returning. It takes effort not to greet Tsuchai when they duck inside the stand. Effort not to smile at IM who stands behind the counter with a smile. But the mere thought of what Haku would do to him if he let his mask slip so easily causes him to flinch and maintain a regular grin as he nods to the father and daughter. Afternoon, Tsuchai joyfully greets. What are you going to have? Ikaraku's automaticity is harmful. Naruto clamps his lips on the order of pork ramen that wants to come out, not because he believes it will reveal who he is. After all, Naruto isn't the only one to order pork, but because small clues often lead to large disclosures, and he can't afford to give anything away at this point in the game. So, please, Kakashi says brightly, though Naruto still feels his every glance like sandpaper against his calm. The usual, Sasuke says, nodding and looking over at Naruto. Naruto bites back the nervous flutter in his gut, fights it off until he no longer has to worry about Sasuke's sharp dark eyes on him, and makes a show of perusing through the menu. Shayu ramen for me, please, he says from under his mask, regretting the deception in which he and Haku have submerged themselves. What would it be like to reincarnate as himself? What would Sasuke have said or done if Naruto had arrived at the gate instead of Yaoko? What would Tsunade, Kakashi, Ino, Neji, or anyone else have said? Because the Naruto who has returned is not the same Naruto who has departed. Remembering his time as Arashi completely, Uzushio and becoming a Kage, his understanding with Kurama, his new friends, his people, all of it has changed him, and he hopes for the better. The sight of Kakashi staring at him brings him out of his thoughts. Yes, he asks nicely, rolling his eyes inwardly. Kakashi, despite being an underhanded bastard, is quite skilled at playing not subtle. If you knew my father, you must have known the Sannin. And the Yondaime, Kakashi replies, his smile bright and joyful and presumably devoid of any honesty. Naruto has met Sarutobai's students twice, once when they were genin and once when they were older, and he laughs a little to himself recalling the first time. As the two Kages conversed, three wide-eyed children, Orochimaru solemn, Tsunade joyful, and Jiraiya boisterous, stood in their teacher's shadow. Back when he was Arashi, Naruto never had time for his own genin team, and it's another regret that can be blamed on the time's unwavering tension. Too much war, too many battles and petty squabbles, and never enough peace. But now, with Uzushio back and a force capable of rivaling any two of the great nations, or more, peace may have a chance. I met the Sannin, he admits, raising his head to meet Kakashi's gaze. Not Namikaze, though. He was a youngster when Uzushio fell the first time. Probably still an academy student, if I recall correctly, and there was simply never a chance before he died after that. True, with the extra benefit of being utterly misleading. Naruto never got to meet his father, not until he and Kurama summoned enough power to activate the failsafe in the seal. But that's bittersweet, and Naruto doesn't like to dwell on it, so he brushes it aside and smiles at Kakashi. That reminds me, do you have a memorial for those killed in action? I have a few old acquaintances I'd like to say hello to. Kakashi looks at him for a long time, and his stare has a weight to it, something heavy and chilly and hard, like steel. He doesn't say anything, but Sasuke nods. I can show you after we eat, the brunette says, flashing a piercing look at their old teacher before returning his gaze to the dish in front of him. He picks up his chopsticks and digs in with a grateful moan. Here you are, IM replies cheerfully, placing another bowl in front of Naruto. Enjoy. Thank you, Naruto responds, but the thought of the monument weighs heavily on his chest, making it difficult to muster his customary excitement. Perhaps this is a good thing, given that Kakashi is still observing him. Maybe sideways and on the sly, but Naruto has been a ninja for about twice as long as the copy nin, and it's nowhere like as subtle as he thinks it is. Naruto gives him a sidelong glance, his brow rising slightly, before returning to his meal. Eating through the mask is difficult, but not impossible, and he's already preoccupied with what he needs to do. After all, he has a vow to Kagami to keep. "They're marrying me off," Kagami declares bluntly, leaning on the waist-high wall that encircles the top of the watchtower. Naruto, seated next him, legs dangling over the drop and eyes fixated on the ocean before them, lets out a gentle breath of unsurprised resignation. "Can you honestly say you weren't anticipating it?" he asks gently, not looking away from where the sky dips into the water. Kagami scoffs, his mouth drawn into a tight, unhappy line. He's not typically one for brooding, being bright and cheery and exuberant to a fault. But when he does, the family resemblance is more obvious than ever. "My bloodline," he huffs, jerking away from the wall to stalk across the roof. It's too small for much, only a few strides across in each direction. But he uses it to pace as best he can, throwing his hands up for good measure. Naruto doesn't look, seen he's this show before, whenever Kagami's father was being especially unbearable. Naruto wants to be sympathetic and outraged on behalf of his friend. But he's also a cage, and he knows how politics work. And the Uchiha clan is nothing if not a breeding ground for political games and power grabs. They're not so much a family as a self-contained soap opera, honestly. And even if he tried to help, he's the head of a foreign power, no matter how friendly with Konoha. With a heavy groan, Kagami drags his palms over his face and then blows out a breath, scuffing his fingers through his straight, chin-length hair. He's stockier than the average Uchiha, more given to a gymnast's muscles than a dancer's build, and shorter than normal, though he's still a good 3 inches taller than Naruto. "I don't even know her," he grumbles, and Naruto sadly smiles. Kagami is a romantic at heart, no matter how many times his father tried to convince him otherwise, or to face a shinobi's reality. He enjoys forbidden romances and love at first sight, fated loves and despite the odds and happy endings. "And she isn't Azami," he adds, because it needs to be stated even if Kagami isn't willing to say it. With a sigh, Kagami shuts his eyes and leans back against the sun-warmed stone. "No," he says, "she's not Azami." "Kagami," Naruto begins, but his pal cuts him off with a head shake. "Stop it, Arashi. Whatever you're about to say, I've probably said to myself at least 20 times, okay." He huffs, "I know our families are enemies. I know we don't have a chance. But she's not a Uchiha," Naruto murmurs, keeping his tone light. He's divorced from the situation, living in Uzushio as he does, and only knows what he hears from Kagami between the diplomat's trips back to Konoha. But Kagami's only ever had good things to say about Azami, even before they got stuck together on an S-rank mission and he came back with hearts in his eyes and a mantra of I. It sounds like something out of a play, feuding families with their children in love, but the reality isn't quite so dramatic. There's a lot of pining, honestly, and carefully measured conversations in public places, longing glances and stern talking tossed from clan elders. Naruto sympathizes, he truly does, but unless Kagami and Azami elope and seek refuge in Uzushio, there's not much he can do. "Yeah," Kagami agrees with a sigh, then shakes his head and looks away, out over the red roofs that march in grand array up the feet of the surrounding hills. Hissy is gentle, from what I've heard, kind, a jounin, and she has the Sharingan. But I want someone who can match me, Arashi, not a meek and gentle wife. Did you know Azami can't cook?" Naruto doesn't respond, but he wraps his hand around Kagami's shoulder and clutches it tightly in an attempt to soothe her. Kagami takes a deep, steady breath and reaches up to place his palm over Naruto's, his fingers urgently closing over the Uzukage. "I won't," he says quietly in the silence between them. "I won't give it up." And Naruto closes his eyes and turns his face away from the calm azure sea, where he can see clouds gathering just beyond the horizon. He can't see anything but disaster coming out of this. Naruto remembers Kagami's name being somewhat faded by time and weather but still readable. He huddles in front of the stone, tracing his fingers over the engraved lines. There is another Uchiha Kagami here, written a smearer, however his Kagami's name is written in a different kanji, and is easily distinguished. Naruto notices Sasuke 3 paces behind him, still, and wonders whether he's talking to his own fallen friends and family, if anyone on this stone is familiar to him. Naruto knows far too many names, far too many for his comfort, and Sarutobi Hiruzen is simply the next in a long line. Senju Azami's name is several letters higher than Kagami's. Thistle Blossom, it signifies, and according to Kagami, it fits her nature. He recalls Kagami's sadness when she died, and the haunted expression on his face for months afterwards, right up until he left Uzushio and never returned. Naruto is aware that there was a child, a son. Kagami made him godfather and bombarded him with photos to the point where the mere threat of photos made Uzushio's fearless storm god cringe. Kazami's son, not Hissi's, and Naruto has to wonder what type of childhood the youngster had growing up as the offspring of two feuding families. Because Azami had died barely a month after the birth, called away on a diplomatic trip that needed to be managed by one of her clan's last live members, only for it to go south halfway through. And Kagami, who had his own responsibilities, had only seen the boy a few times. Naruto recognizes the boy's name, which has been engraved into the horrible memorial. Another tragedy in Naruto's life, another loss for Kagami's family. Given the circumstances surrounding the Uchiha clan, he didn't expect anything different, and especially not in light of the boy's personal situation. A child born outside of an arranged marriage to a mother deemed an enemy of the clan, but abandoned by the betrayed wife to be reared as a full-blooded Uchiha. Naruto can't imagine what the boy went through. He adored Kagami and still does, but some of his decisions left much to be desired. Naruto believes it is no longer important. That was handled by Uchiha Itachi. Even if the boy had survived childhood and grown into a respectable member of his clan, and perhaps it did, perhaps Hissi was actually generous enough to rear a child not her own till her death, he was most likely killed in the bloodbath. After all, only Sasuke escaped the bloodbath that night. An Uchiha, Sasuke inquires, as though prompted by the concept. Naruto gently nods, getting to his feet and placing the lilies he had brought before the stone. The very best Uchiha, he replies, cracking a slight smile. Yes, Kagami made bad decisions, but Naruto knows as well as anyone that the Uchiha are insanely in love. All the emotional suppression in the world, which, of course, Kagami never believed in, can only get them so far away from their curse, considering how closely it's linked to their family. And Kagami was always upbeat and willing to help in any way he could. An excellent friend and a horrible foe, she is headstrong, bold, and unusually observant. Naruto encountered his fair number of Uchiha as Arashi, but he'll always remember Kagami as the best of them. Even when geniuses like Itachi and the original Kagami, the Nidaime Hokage's attendant, are considered. With a quiet sigh, he takes a step back, remembering Kagami's grin, his wisdom, and his unwavering friendship through years and fights and natural catastrophes, deaths and births, and the prospect of war. And yet, despite his pedigree, despite the power and distinctiveness of his Sharingan, Suna forces managed to sneak so far behind Konoha's defenses, lie in wait for a single messenger, moving rapidly and secretly, and kill him, despite the fact that no one has touched Kagami during a fight. Kagami was slain when he shouldn't have been in danger, killed by a squad of shinobi almost a whole country away from where they should have been. And Naruto doesn't think it's paranoid to blame Danzo as well, because Uzushio had held out for the minimum 15 days and then some. Arashi assumed Kagami had just been held up by politics, and it wasn't until 25 days into a siege Uzushio wasn't prepared for that he understood something had happened. That Kagami had failed and Konoha would not appear, that Uzushio was alone against the strength of a town twice its size and well-equipped to fight a battle. Well-equipped to fight a war against Uzushio in particular, with knowledge of the city's forces that only an Uzushio shinobi, and a high-ranking shinobi at that, should have possessed. Or a well-placed one, as Raizi was, as the cherished nephew of the loyal assistant to the Uzukichi. Why? Naruto asks solemnly, peering at the memorial, unsure whether he's addressing Danzo or the gods themselves. Why would you do such a thing? We posed no danger to Konoha. We had never been. We exchanged everything, including secrets, seals, and procedures. Why would you destroy us when all we ever provided you was friendship? How many people died as a result of one neurotic, war-mongering jerk? How many of my folks are there? And how come no one ever noticed that there was something else going on? No one, not even Saru. But Hiruzen had always been far too trusting of his own people, especially Danzo. But he's not going to get away with it. Not for another minute. Naruto leans out, brushes his fingertips over Kagami's and his Gotson's names again, and then turns away. He smiles at Sasuke, bright and happy, despite the fact that his heart is shattering and the steel of his determination is the only thing keeping him going. Sasuke glances back, towering and proud, nothing like Kagami, but with an equal vein of bullheaded, committed strength within himself. His dark eyes aren't entirely sympathetic because they're not friends, at least, not Sasuke and Yaoko. But there's an understanding in them, a kind of reluctant connection only grudgingly admitted to. Loss, loneliness, and family are finally found as Naruto steps past, his fingertips resting gently on Sasuke's shoulder. Thank you, he says, turning away from the inn and Haku, back to the reason he came here. Back to his strategizing and his attempts to bring down Danzo. A white Geofalcon, silhouetted against the pure blue of the summer sky, releases a keening cry and curls its wings, descending towards its master. As it falls, the message canister tied to its leg flashes in the sun, and Naruto turns to look, one hand lifted to hide his eyes. There are no clouds in the sky yet, but he wonders why he thinks they should be. Naruto is enraged. But no, because fury is a simmer, a campfire flame, a touch of heat beneath the skin, and this is not. Because Naruto is enraged, and it's an eruption, a spark leaping into the trees and igniting an entire forest, a sun-searing burn at his core that's devouring him from the inside out. He's out of breath, voiceless, shattered and hastily sewn back together, the rage leaking out between the seams. Haku is too calm, his black gaze fixed on Naruto as the blonde paces their own chambers. Curled on the bed, his legs brought up under him, he resembles a child, a beautiful sculpture cut of the most delicate ice and left to the mercy of the light, like something with razor-sharp edges that can't be seen, ready to cut even if they don't know what to cut yet. Even if there is no enemy here, they are miles and days away from home. Their home is under threat. Their home, which need them, requires them there, requires them here, and requires them in both locations at the same time, putting an end to the danger. When Naruto shuts his eyes, all he sees is a red sun rising, gates tumbling, and walls crumbling in the face of the invading armies. A knife is at his jugular, his blood is a cherry red, warm hot spill against his flesh, and his people, his village, are all around him. Yui's face was covered in blood from a head wound, creating a crimson anger mask. Shunka, her teeth bared and murder in her eyes, short swords in hand, gore splattered on her garments. Regardless of the kunai stabbed deep into his skin, Haru stood watch over his father's fallen body, Fuyu rushing Naruto to the wall, only to perish by accepting a jutsu meant for him. It was a war, a cruel, violent fight with no point because Uzushio made sure that even if Kiri claimed victory that day, they paid dearly for it, with blood and bodies and dead on the sand. Uzushio was devastated. The majority of Kiri's army was lost, and an entire kingdom was scattered for decades, unable to find a home. Naruto will not allow that to happen again. This time, Uzushio has 5 Jinchuriki to call on, plenty of experienced Jounin and Chunin, and a city that will not let her people be driven from her for anything. Aside from Konoha, they have allies, including a pact with one of the Sannin and the friendship of the Raikage's brother and one of Kumo's strongest Kunoichi. They have Naruto, who is Arashi, who is Naruto, and who will never ever allow history to repeat itself, who returned from the dead to do what he failed to do the last time, save his people. He doesn't want a war, and he doesn't want to risk it, but if Kiri begins one, Naruto will make sure Uzushio finishes it. For the long haul, a breath, another, slow and steady and controlled, and he's finally dragging himself back from the brink, channeling the cage that he's been twice over, shoving everything that isn't absolutely necessary deep down where it can't touch him. Slow breaths, controlled movements till his throat eventually relaxed enough for him to speak. His rage has always been an eruption, a geyser, shooting up red hot and then fading quickly, which Naruto appreciates. He blinks open his eyes, staring at the uninteresting white wall in front of him, licks his lips, and says deliberately, "You have to go back, Haku." Haku rises from his bed, eyes narrowed and attitude gloomy, like a serpent uncoiling. "Naruto," he says cautiously. "No," Naruto says sharply, trying not to show the tremor deep within himself, the vein of doubt in his resolve. He's never been adept at choosing between possibilities, instead relying on the belief that nothing is impossible, and that he truly can do everything. Even with shadow clones, he can't be everywhere at once, especially at such great distances as the one between Uzushio and Konoha. "No, Haku, I have to see this through. Danzo needs to pay for what he's done before he's given any more chances to fuck everything up. It's bad enough that he knows Uzushio is back, but we're going to have 2 more Jinchuriki here soon enough, along with half of our genin teams, and I don't want them to have to spend every damn minute on the lookout for someone who might slit their throat." "You're asking me to give up my Uzukage," Haku says calmly, but Naruto sees right through him. The most dangerous Haku is a mild one. "You are asking me to abandon my Uzukage in the middle of a hostile situation with no allies or backup, facing down a mad, genius chess master who orchestrated your death the last time around. I love you, Naruto, and I would die for you. You are my reason for living and the source of all my happiness, but please don't ask this of me." Naruto huffs a groan and rakes a hand through his hair, only to have his fingers get caught in the thin braids and yanked. "Haku, there's no other choice. You're my left hand. If anyone can deal with this, and do it well enough to protect us from another senseless conflict, it's you." Please, he pleads softly, studying Haku's mulish countenance, the hard line of his mouth mixed with the wavering will in his eyes. Haku, please. I'm not going to make it a command, but please. There's a lengthy, long minute where Haku visibly battles himself. He then raises his hands in defeat with a heavy sigh. Gaara is going to kill me, he admits dejectedly. He's going to brutally murder me, and then march off to raise Kirigakure to the ground, using my mangled body as his victory banner. You're being a little overdramatic, Naruto says dryly to his friend. I don't believe so, Haku says softly, because a sweet Haku is even more deadly than a mild one. However, I'll notify the others of your current situation so that we know where to search when Danzo puts your body somewhere out of the way. Haku. Naruto pulls his mouth shut and shuffles out of the line of fire, allowing the Brennet pack to rest in peace. I knew I should have just been a fisherman, he laments, his voice low. I'd receive a lot more respect that way. Haku slips up alongside him on the bed, banging their shoulders together with a sigh and a huff. Never, he says, yet he smiles. You'd make a terrible fisherman, Naruto. Naruto yields and returns a rapid and brilliant grin, tipping to the side to softly smack their heads together. Probably, he says, laughing. You know, you're not the first person to say that. You'll be careful, Haku says, kissing his forehead, caught, as always, somewhere between mother, brother, and big sister. Of course, Naruto responds, and they both pretend it's not the obvious lie it is. He sees Haku off at the gate, closely monitored by their ever-present guard, and endures another round of whispered threats to be on his best behavior, and as careful as humanly possible before Haku takes his departure, moving so quickly he's little more than a blur. Then Naruto is left on his own in Konoha with all of his memories and the people he once abandoned, succumbing to the lure of his past. Sasuke has sought for him, Kakashi worries, Iruka was the last to see him, and Tsunade mourns him. He was left with Danzo, who was indirectly to blame for his death. He's a bit disoriented, a little adrift, since he's forgotten what it's like to be alone in the last half-decade, despite having spent his entire youth learning. But there's a mission to complete, something to concentrate on, and Naruto turns his attention to it. He ignores the ANBU lurking in the shadows, instead focusing his attention on spotting root members in the crowd and identifying each by the seal that keeps them silent as he walks through Konoha's streets, coming out of Yamanaka's flower shop. There, near the weapons store, another, and Naruto has little doubt as to how Danzo obtains recruits. Orphans, most likely, children who will be missed. He recalls Raizi, the desperation in his eyes, and is relieved that the mask eliminates the need to work to maintain a smile. Uzushio whispers in his ear, "Protector, a breath of sea wind among the steamy rush of Konoha's streets. My child, you will find him." Naruto takes a step to the side, away from the flow of traffic, and rests back against the wall, tilting his head back and closing his eyes. Uzushio doesn't talk to him very often. She's enormous, too vast, and there's very little in her that's human, so she struggles to understand her people, no matter how much she loves them. But when she speaks, he pays attention. He responds because she is everything to him. She is his in the same way that he is hers, in the same way that every live soul in the city and the city itself are his to care for. She is every individual within the walls and every soul that has ever lived within their borders, and Naruto is nearly overcome with devotion for her every time he breathes. I will. You know I will, he says quietly, just like he promised to return to her when she called. And doesn't he always keep his promises? He's still trying to hold on to the one he made for Mito, but soon, he'll be able to fulfill that soon. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3, but very soon. On their first hour in the city, Uzumaki Anzu and her husband Ken had brought him a handful of old papers. Before Uzushio's summons, they had been wandering merchants in Earth Country, and both of them were rough and worn, but far from unfriendly. Anzu's hands had trembling slightly when she placed the documents in front of him on the desk, and it must have seemed absurd to anybody outside. 2 experienced and lethal shinobi-trained travelers bending before a child of just 13. Uzumaki Yui was my third cousin, Anzu explained matter-of-factly. She never got it out of Uzushio before it fell, but when my family went hunting for survivors, they found her nephew wandering on the coast of Weeb, and she had hesitated, and Naruto had suppressed the temptation to turn away. Anzu shook her head, sharp and angry, and said he had cut out his own tongue. She looked Naruto in the eyes, stern and pale but calm, and motioned to the documents. There was a seal on it. My mother was never excellent at producing seals, but she was a good hand at copying them, even from such a small original. Raizi never informed them what occurred, but they drew their own conclusions and saved those documents just in case, so I thought it best to pass them on. Kabuto had recognized that seal when he walked into Naruto's office one day to study it. Orochimaru had sensed it as well, when Naruto managed to gather his courage and calm down enough to approach the Sannin. Danzo, they both said, unshakable, even though they had no idea what the context was. Traitor, they'd said, together and apart, and Naruto had never contemplated what could drive an extraordinarily powerful jounin and a very trained spy away from the town that had raised them. But manipulation is something Naruto despises more than anything else. Twisting someone's mind and turning them against friends, poking and prodding and nudging until something in the brain is irreparably shattered. Horrifying. That's shameful, and he despises it. While Naruto has reservations about some of Orochimaru's past actions, he knows without conceit that Uzushio is a valuable ally, and the Snake Sage respects that enough. Respects what Uzushio and its seals and strength can do for him enough that he's willing to make at least a few concessions in the name of morality and keeping the Uzukage placated. And for the friendship with Oto, for Suigetsu, Kimamaru, and Kidomaru, and for the way Kabuto clearly adores Orochimaru as one of the few constants in his life. For all of this, Naruto is willing to extend a hand, both as Uzukage and as himself. Naruto is eager to take Danzo down for Kabuto and Orochimaru as well. A shinobi silent figure lays against the wall beside him, smelling slightly of paper, fresh grass, and honing oil. You know, I've turned that last conversation over in my mind so many times I can recite it in my sleep. You were going to say I want them to acknowledge me. I want that even more than I want to become Uzukage, a quiet voice murmurs. Naruto gently opens his eyes, every muscle relaxed but ready to move, though he has no idea where to move to. If this is the end, if his cover has been blown, because those eyes are ever so slightly wounded, pained even though he hides it well, and Naruto doesn't regret leaving. Uzushio needed him, his people needed him, and he honestly can't imagine how their lives would have turned out if he hadn't gone. Regrets, but not enough to be regretful. I've heard that you're interested in the history of Konoha, Yaoko-san. If you'd like to come back to my apartment, I can answer any questions you have, Iruka says cheerfully. Despite his years in a classroom, Iruka is still a shinobi, trained and tested. He understands deception as well as anyone. Naruto dips his head and pushes off the wall, remembering at the last second not to cross his arms behind his head and instead tucking them into his sleeves. That would be fantastic. Yumino-san, he says respectfully, working hard to keep his voice steady between nerves, anticipation, and sheer joy that Iruka missed him. He wasn't exactly skeptical, but confirmation is still nice. Touching, the walk is quiet except for a few inane bits of talk, both of them aware of the ANBU watchers lurking around them. Even as Iruka escorts him up the stairs to his apartment, lets him in with a smile, and then closes the door firmly behind them, Naruto keeps his gaze fixed on his surroundings. Again, silence as Naruto turns to face his former teacher. Taking a breath, he looks at the windows, which are covered, and the walls, which are thick because the building is ancient and robust, and allows the first bits of stress to leave his shoulders. Everything is fine. This is Iruka, one of his very first precious people, and everything is fine. He reaches up, pulls the mask down to dangle around his neck, and grins at the Chunin with all the warmth he can muster. Hello, Iruka-sensei, he greets enthusiastically. There is a long pause before Iruka laughs. He laughs and steps forward, pulling Naruto into a close, rib-cracking hug as the bells in Naruto's hair jangle madly with the sudden tug, and breaths out, "Oh, Naruto, I missed you so much," and then adds, calling yourself Yaoko, "Didn't I tell you that you're not that demon fox?" Naruto feels an indignant Kurama stir within him, but waves the fox away and smiles at his teacher. He's not really a demon, he says, and someone was controlling him when he attacked Konoha. Kurama's not that horrible, he grumbles again, the emotional equivalent of an but Naruto ignores him with the ease of long practice. Iruka pauses, but before Naruto can worry, he's smiling and shaking his head, murmuring, "Of course you'd make friends with him, Naruto. What was I expecting?" He takes a step back, but only enough to drag Naruto over to the couch and pull him down. "Tell me," he commands, "how have you spent the last 7 years, Naruto?" It's Naruto's turn to pause, and he reaches up and pulls the ornaments from his hair, just to give his hands something to do. First and foremost, he asks, forcing himself to be serious, because if Iruka guessed, although, to be fair, he has context that most people don't. The teacher gives him an offended huff, and Iruka crosses his arms over his chest. "Even if I was never much of a frontline soldier," he says with a faintly wounded dignity, "I earned my rank, Naruto. I'm a good spy. You and Haku leave, with you slipping up and mentioning Uzushio before you leave, and then years later a blonde and a brunette arrive talking about their newly rebuilt village of Uzushio, one of them named Yaoko, and wearing a mask that hides his face. Not a prank, Naruto says, his voice gentle but firm. Do you really think I'd fool so many of my precious people for a prank? Iruka-sensei, it's serious. This is about why Uzushio fell almost 30 years ago, about doing whatever I can to prevent it from happening again. It's dangerous, Iruka-sensei, and you can't tell anyone. Don't even think about it too heavily. Iruka looks him in the eyes. Naruto is off-kilter, tense, and nervous, and the teacher's stare softens, eases a little, and he reaches out to take Naruto into another close hug. You grew up, Naruto, he murmurs, sad and triumphant and regretful and a million other things Naruto can't even begin to name. He simply closes his eyes and buries his face in Iruka's shoulder, inhaling the familiar sense of Konoha, classrooms, and family. I'm really sorry I didn't get to witness it. Naruto takes a deep breath, another, a third, and wraps his composure about himself like armor, pulling back to grin at Iruka as best he can. Perhaps it's a little watery, but it's bright and happy, and he feels bright and happy. The ache in his chest gone and settled into something similar to what he felt the first time he looked out over an entire Uzushio. You'll just have to come visit, he says. Uzushio is back, and it's gorgeous, Iruka-sensei. You won't believe how gorgeous it is. I like to climb to the top of the hills over the village when the sun sets, and it turns the ocean red and gold and the city glows. Gaara's the Jounin commander, and Haku is my bodyguard, but Utakata and Kabuto always call him my babysitter. Breathe, Naruto, Iruka exclaims, reaching out to tweak his nose like no one has in years. Haku, Gaara, Kabuto, F, and the others all take liberties, tease, poke, and prod in their own ways. But none of them can quite replace Iruka's role as a slightly overbearing elder brother. But that's okay because Naruto never intended for them to, and Iruka is enough. Naruto grins at him, his heart a size too big for his chest, and Iruka smiles back, warm and fond and relieved, scuffing a hand through his long blonde hair once more. I'm glad, he says lovingly. I'm very delighted you're happy, Naruto. Naruto remembers his words that night and has never been able to get them out of his head, no matter how many years have passed. Naruto, you should do whatever makes you happy, because even if the villagers acknowledge you, it won't be enough if you're unhappy. And, above all, I want you to be strong, safe, and happy no matter what path you choose in the end. He chose his route, planted his feet firmly on it, and has never wavered because he made vows. And his Nindo isn't one of the many things that have changed in the last 7 years. I never break my word. That's the way of the ninja. There are more pledges today than ever before. His oaths as Uzukage, oaths to Mito, promises to Uzushio, and how he's promised to bring justice for the deceased. His word has been delivered numerous times, and Naruto will honor each case, every single one, since his lovely people have taught him. That's his way, and it'll never change no matter what else happens. You're going to do something risky, aren't you? Huffs Kurama. Despite the wording, it is not a question. Naruto sighs and adds one more line to the seal cut into the tree trunk in front of him. There are 6 additional seals, 6 more trees arranged in a circle with Naruto's seals on the trunk side facing out. After going through this in his thoughts so many times, secret from Haku, Gaara, Utakata, and anybody else who would feel the need to point out all of the risks even though Naruto has already considered every single one. It was only the work of 10 minutes to set up the barrier. More of Shihara favorite sensei's mood-altering substances, coupled with seals to impact the mind and divert attention elsewhere. They send the message, don't look. There's nothing to see if you don't look or pause. Reckless means that I haven't examined all possible possibilities, he notes, happy for the silence that allows him to respond loudly without feeling like a psychotic. I even got Orochimaru to divert Iro attention. Senon's thank you for your foresight. No, risky suggests a bad plan with too many variables and idiotic dangers, Kurama responds. And the snake is and will always be a creep. Did you and Haku swap babysitting duties or something? Naruto mutters as he slides past the barrier, grabbing for the sealing scroll he keeps in his left sleeve. A single drop of blood falls to his fingers, followed by a heavy wooden shaft, the butt covered with iron and the other end crowned with 40 centimeters of well-honed blade, the steel gleaming blue in the moonlight. Naruto welcomes Arashi's Naginata, SJI, to his hand like an extension of his arm, sweeping it out in a broad circle and allowing himself one showy spin above his head before resetting his grasp with a grin. The Naginata is typically considered a female weapon, but Naruto, like Arashi, isn't exactly a towering example of manly stature and strength. He's actually quite short, and he'll never have the reach of Sasuke or Kakashi. His greatest qualities are his ability to be quick, cunning, and unpredictable, which SJI enhances. It matches his hand and fighting style, maintains him at a distance so he can use his chakra reserves and smash an opponent with jutsus, but also allows him to duck in close enough to lay seals with skin contact. 4 lengthy sweeps of the capped butt and a design are taking place on the packed dirt, which has been cleared of leaves for this purpose. It's big, over 2 meters across, but it's deceptively simple. When Naruto activates it, it will begin to leak a certain form of chakra into the air, chakra connected to him, but in numbers so minute that even the Hyuga clan will not notice. There are 10 days until the first of the month and 10 days before the Chunin exams begin, giving him 7 days to activate the transportation seals he brought with him, allowing the 4 teams to cross through to Konoha. 7 days, at most 10 days, to locate evidence of what Danzo is hiding and bring it to Tsunade wrapped in a large red bow. It's been 7 days. He's going to be reckless, of course, but Haku is out of harm's way, and everyone else who is vulnerable is still secure behind Uzushio's nearly impenetrable barrier. He has room for recklessness now, even if he hasn't had it since he became Uzukage. A step back allows him to see the entire design, the outer boundary complete. Naruto swings SJI over to use the long blade for the fine detail work required for the interior, and it's done in broad strokes, thick twisting lines through the dirt, and with a satisfied nod. Not to belittle the old geezer, but don't you think this is a little excessive? Hirama inquires, gruff but intrigued. A tiny flare of chakra indicates that he is scrutinizing the pattern of the seal through Naruto's eyes. There's no such thing as overkill, Naruto gleefully argues, flitting through the lines required for the output template, and beginning on the conversion matrix. There's no doubt, no pause, had he's this all planned out for weeks. Danzo also has complete control of route. I have a grumpy demon fox, some jutsus, and some seals. It's always a good idea to have backup plans. You make it sound like you have ideas other than just attacking till it's dead. Alternatively, talk till it regrets its entire life and repents. Hirama, don't act as if you're not a part of this decision-making process. If you don't agree with my plans, you have every right to object. And wasn't it you who pushed me the last time we went on a mission? Hirama huffs arrogantly. I am a wise and noble power spirit who was trained by the sage of 6 paths himself. I've got better things to do with my time than criticize your alleged ideas. Fishcake. Don't call me Fishcake, you moron. At the very least, I'm not afraid of a girl. I'm sorry to break it to you, brat, but your mother is a monster. The fact that you are not afraid of her, even her chakra impression, simply indicates that it is inherited. Alternatively, catching. Hirama, stop treating my mum like she's an illness. The chakras feel, as tightly confined and tamed as it is nostalgic, as familiar as his boyhood. Jiraiya follows it since that's what he's always done. Past Hokage Mountain and into the cool twilight forests. Jiraiya increases up his pace till he's virtually running among the darker trees, cream-colored fabric half covered by long black hair, pale complexion in the moonlight. However, it is not required. When he bursts into a clearing, 1 step away from summoning a toad and prepared for battle, he finds Orochimaru waiting for him. The snake sage is reclining on a boulder in the dim half-light, with no weapons or summons visible, and he appears almost peaceful. Jiraiya hasn't seen him appear that calm in a long time. Yes, twisted, crafty, enraged, or homicidal, but never like this, not since he abandoned the village. He's never been more at peace than he is right now. It's staggering. Jiraiya, Orochimaru murmurs softly, cocking his head as though it's quite usual for them to run into one other half a mile from Konoha's walls. You're a long distance from Rice Country. Orochimaru, Jiraiya expounds. Orochimaru does not move, does not even rise, despite the fact that he would be at a disadvantage here if Jiraiya chose to attack. I had some information I wanted to give you, and I figured it would be simpler for you to believe me if I did it in person. Jiraiya believes he has every right to give his former teammate a dubious glance. Orochimaru responds by rolling his eyes in that haughty, arrogant manner that used to drive Jiraiya insane when they were kids. He sighs, clearly distressed, and offers, Jiraiya, you've been looking for Akatsuki since I left, but you've never found him. You have no idea who the leader is or where they are based. But I've been convinced that sharing what I know will be useful. It's strange that for someone as quiet as Orochimaru has always been, Jiraiya has never seen him say 5 words when 20 would suffice. He takes 4 careful steps forward with an eye roll of his own and replies dubiously, Oh really? Orochimaru stares at him for a long while, golden eyes calculating, and then huffs grandly, like the dramatic bastard he is, shakes back one of his long sleeves, and extends his palm up to Jiraiya. Jiraiya gives him a dubious glance before taking 2 more steps forward. It's only a hand, thin and long-fingered and exquisite, with calluses like any shinobi worth their kunai. Jiraiya can see the faint coloring of scars in the moonlight, and one scar in particular, a long, narrow slash from the center of Orochimaru's palm that extends all the way up to the middle of his forearm, just missing the major veins in his wrist. That, too, is eerily familiar, a memento from one of their first missions as Chunin, although Jiraiya hasn't seen it in years. He narrows his eyes in suspicion, then looks up at Orochimaru with a feeling of disbelief in his chest. Surely it isn't my original body? Yeah, Orochimaru answers, because he's a jerk who's made a game out of violating Jiraiya's expectations. Good or bad? There was a scarcity of acceptable hosts the last time I needed one, and our lovely Uzushio managed to convince my minions that I had saved this one. He shoved me back in it, trapped my spirit inside, and informed me of my folly. With a slight wince, he withdraws his hand. The man is really ridiculous, just like he was when we were kids. Jiraiya's knees are noticeably shaky. He takes a big breath and collapses to the ground, sitting cross-legged and raking his palm across his face. Arashi, he asks after a brief pause. Orochimaru raises one graceful brow towards him. I doubt he's gone to great lengths to conceal it. But, certainly, the Arashi you remember is in command of Uzushio right now. He pauses, which is unusual for him, and then continues thoughtfully, I have been reminded that my initial ambitions are still within reach, and far more plausible than I had come to believe. Jiraiya frowns as she sorts through her belongings. He is aware of Orochimaru's original goals. He wanted to live long enough to see his parents reincarnated. His expectations of forecasting or detecting reincarnations were dashed years ago due to a lack of substantial evidence. But Uzumaki Arashi is still in power of his town, despite the fact that the rest of the world believes he is dead. But Orochimaru believes in reincarnation again, truly believes in it if his apparent peace with himself is any indication. And Jiraiya can only take one conclusion from that. He exhales slowly and deeply, resisting the temptation to pinch himself. This is unreal. I'd accuse you of deception, but I doubt you have the creativity for anything like this. Damn. Jiraiya would say there was a small, wry smirk pulling at one corner of Orochimaru's mouth if he didn't know better, another reminder of their boyhood, of simpler times. And, while Jiraiya should be more skeptical, taking a step back and a step away, the Orochimaru in front of him has lost the overtones of madness that he's been carrying for decades. While it's not okay, not even close, Sarutobi-sensei, he thinks, with a pang and a bite of furious, bitter pain, it's better. It's the best it's been in a long time. Jiraiya is a superior collaborator, right? He responds emphatically, shaking his head and focused on the individual in front of him. You mentioned you knew something about the Akatsuki. Orochimaru's eyes sparkle in the darkness as he slides off his boulder and lands across from Jiraiya. Moonlight catches on the planes of his face, the curve of one ear glitters over the Tomo-shaped earring there, and then flows through the uninterrupted darkness of his hair like liquid silver. Yes, he answers, and that's the Orochimaru Jiraiya recalls from missions as a child, as a teenager, before Dan and Nawaki's murders, Tsunade's departure, and Sarutobai's selection of Minato as his successor ripped a thread of sanity from him. Languid and lethal as a serpent, he is intensely concentrated despite his sneer and slanted glance. What do you know about Uchiha Madara, Jiraiya? Sasuke awakens to a sky already blanketed with advancing clouds, low and heavy, and the taste of impending rain on the back of his tongue like quicksilver. The air is quiet and damp, humid enough to make him irritated and unhappy at the same time. For a long time, he considers staying in bed till evening, duty at the mission's assignment desk be damned. But then he remembers that he's still paired with Ino, and she'll never let him get away with it. Not only that, but she'll track him down, pull him out into the street in his boxers, and torment him until he repents of the great sin of abandoning her to an entire shift of mind-numbing boredom. Sasuke sometimes longs for the days when her only objective in life was to please him. Sasuke sighs and grimaces as he drags himself out from beneath the sweat-sticky sheet, flinging it aside and makes his way to the bathroom for a short, icy shower. The rush of water is a brief respite that ends far too quickly, and he abandons his customary attire in favor of a dark blue tank top under his jounin vest and his lightest pair of pants. Oh no, he despises dampness. Even coffee is too hot for him, and he wanders around the kitchen for a bit, unsure what to do with the extra 20 minutes he saves by not preparing it. Sasuke grudgingly skulks out of his flat, joining the morning crowd on the streets, after catching himself putting his head in the freezer for the third time. Sasuke avoids the gawkers with the ease of long practice as he goes for the Yamanaka flower shop. Despite his naked ANBU tattoo and tank top, He's about halfway there when he's stopped in his tracks by a peal of heartbreakingly familiar laughter. Hearing that sound, Sasuke nearly collapses. It's as if his legs have been severed, as if gravity has abruptly whirled away beneath his feet, leaving only a tearing, painful recognition that goes soul deep and then boils upwards to his heart. Because he's been listening for that exact same laugh for nearly 7 years, on every mission and in every country he's ever visited. It's tormented him more than Itachi's last words that night, more than the shadow of his brother in the town, more than standing in front of the shrine ever did, since it's Naruto, and how could it not be? He jerks around, his heart pounding like a double-time tattoo in his chest, scanning the street for spiky blonde hair and tan skin. There's a flash of gold there, but it's approximately 3 shades too pale, the skin 3 shades too dark, and how on earth can Yaoko have Naruto's laugh? Dreaming, Sasuke harshly tells himself, "You're having a nightmare, unless you've gone nuts. It can't be." But then it comes back, brighter, louder, and freer than anything else could ever be, just as Sasuke remembers it, except that it's coming from Yaoko, which is inconceivable. Yaoko carries himself differently. He doesn't blurt out his thoughts, charge forward recklessly, or grin stupidly at everything under the sun. When Sasuke arches his brow at him, he doesn't scratch the back of his head in sheepish humiliation, or puff up in fury in front of Tsunade's dubious gaze, and he doesn't drape an arm around Sasuke's shoulders in easy camaraderie the way no one else does. This isn't Naruto. But he's conversing with Iruka. He's standing off to one side of the street, nestled back between 2 store displays, talking to Iruka as if they're old friends. Iruka is dressed in uniform as usual, and Yaoko is wearing another short kimono, this time in a bright sea blue, but the blonde is wearing it differently, just slightly, and it's nothing Sasuke would have noticed if there hadn't been anything else to attract his attention to it. But he can't help but remember the day Sakura pulled him to a fair and Naruto tagged along. They'd played games and relaxed, as much as Sasuke ever allowed himself to relax back then. And for a few hours, they'd been children rather than shinobi. Naruto wore a kimono that was plainly secondhand and even more clearly borrowed from Kiba, judging by the light layer of dog hair, and he looked easy, given that it was his first time wearing formal clothing. He didn't appear as Sasuke anticipated him to. The way he moved, the way he held himself, spoke of a natural grace that was all too unusual to behold. No genin had his economy of motion and understanding of his own body. Yaoko had handled himself like Kakashi when he first arrived, languid and at ease and carefree, but only on the surface. Under the surface, there had been tension, hesitancy, and wariness, just what Sasuke would have anticipated from a foreign nin approaching a power whose reception was unclear. But now, Yaoko is now moving like Naruto did that night. The twitch of his hands as he speaks, the tilt of his head as he apparently grins up at the Chunin, all point to this. He notices it in the way his feet adjust before taking a step, the way a hand lightly strokes the long blonde hair. Son, Sasuke thinks, and feels like the world's biggest fool for not noticing sooner. How much faster would the sun and light bouncing off water darken a person's skin? How much faster could you bleach someone's hair 3 shades lighter? How much of a difference would that make after nearly 7 years of continuous exposure? From his face and touches the back of his head, a shadow of the familiar gesture Sasuke has sought in crowds on numerous occasions. How much of Yaoko's diplomatic elegance was a ruse? How much was affected simply to isolate him from the rowdy blonde who vanished with Haku, then reappeared with Yuki, and damn it all, Sasuke is ANBU. He should be smarter than this. Another laugh, a nod from Yaoko, and Yaoko, Sasuke thinks, and the parts are coming together, no, flying into place like kunai thrown at a target. When Ino asked him about his name, he said something. Yaoko, among other things, is a female name. Yaoko, the fox spirit. Kitsune, Kyuubi no. The only way he could have been more obvious about it, God forbid, was if he really named himself Fox. He hadn't even claimed to being an Uzumaki until his persona had become ingrained in everyone's minds. And Sasuke had fell for it, had fallen for green eyes because he had been so focused on seeing blue. On finding Naruto that he hadn't even known Naruto had waltzed into Konoha right under his nose. Sasuke is still a couple inches taller than him. Perhaps petty, but ultimately more rewarding. Sasuke has never claimed to be particularly mature. Sasuke takes a breath as the world spins and settles. Naruto is Yaoko. All of their careful sidestepping above the market, the ever-present mask, it was all because Yaoko is Naruto. His heart is on the verge of bursting through his chest. It feels as rapid as hummingbird wings. But Sasuke is completely still, gravity restored, anchored by the unexpected. Dizzying, overwhelming wave of happiness, joy and sweeping gratification, as well as enough glee to choke him, are all intertwined with the understanding that this is Naruto. Naruto, who has spent the last 7 years constructing a community that is home to at least 5 Jinchuriki, who has another home that isn't Konoha, but it matters so little right now that Sasuke can't force himself to think about it. Naruto has arrived. He wants to march over there, interrupt their talk, and put himself squarely in Naruto's path. Wants to take Naruto by the collar of his deceptively tidy kimono and punch him in the face. But he's too delighted for that kind of reaction. Wants to grab him by the collar and yank him in close. He deserves a kiss. Sasuke wants to kiss him, grab him and never let him go, shake him, hug him, punch him, and just touch him. Because all Sasuke has wanted since waking up in the hospital to find Naruto gone is for Naruto to return. And he has. Sasuke tilts his head back to the sky and closes his eyes firmly, oblivious to the crowd, the humidity, and everything beyond the beautiful blonde, sparkling with life and joy and standing just 30 feet away. Sasuke glances aside for a split second, unsure whether to grin, laugh, cry, or rage. And then he glances back, since he turned away once and his life was broken. Never, ever again. Never. Sasuke may not be the type of genius that invented a new type of clone at the age of 12, but he is above average with shadow clones. It's simple enough to split off from Naruto, who is already being watched by an entire ANBU squad and is unlikely to notice or dismiss another body among the press, and move deeper into the hamlet. He's in disbelief, but he's also not. In fact, he is more stable than he has been in nearly 7 years. My hunt is finished, he thinks, and despite the fact that he's never faltered in his purpose, it's still incredible that he's succeeded. That he has discovered Naruto. Or, well, that Naruto has returned fully on his own will and without any influence from Sasuke, no matter how much it stings. But it's all the same in the end, right? It's all right. It makes no difference. There's no reason to worry about it, and 1,001 reasons why. Why has Naruto chosen to return in this manner, secret and surreptitious and hidden from everyone? When the bright 11-year-old who left was so eager to declare himself, ready to do whatever it took for the recognition that should have been his by virtue of being human, let alone a Konoha shinobi. And, yes, Sasuke can still feel bitter about it, because he recalls his father, Itachi, the ideal of the perfect Uchiha, the perfect brother. And Sasuke, no matter how brilliant, competent, or advanced for his age, was never good enough. Never good enough to compete with him, to get their father's attention, or to get anything more from him than a few dismissive remarks. Sasuke's family were not flawless, and it took a lot of agony and soul-searching and forcing himself to face the genuine memories rather than the idealized versions for him to accept that fact. Regardless of whether Itachi, breathe, Sasuke comes to a halt on the rooftop overlooking the entrance of an apartment building. Think, Naruto has arrived. He's up to something, and he doesn't want anyone to know, or he's trying to hide from someone. Not Uzushio, because no one would pretend to be that attached to an area only for the sake of a cover. So he's running away from someone who's most likely in Konoha. It's not a joke or a hoax, not with so much work put into the disguise, the performance, the deliberate distance, and the claims of knowing Kakashi's father. Even if Uzushio is nicknamed the Village of Longevity, as Sakura so generously reminded him during their binge, that's still a very ridiculous claim to make, and Sasuke puts it away for future contemplation. The issue at hand right now is who Naruto is so wary of, and this is Naruto, who charged the demon brothers without hesitation, who faced down Mamachi Zabuza on their first mission out of the village, who has always been reckless beyond any reasonable limits, and how much of a threat they are to him. Whether or not Konoha is present, Sasuke is not about to cause any harm to Naruto. Not unless Sasuke is the one causing the injury, and he's still undecided between punching or kissing the imbecile. Sasuke believes he's disguising his identity because the people of Konoha are still collectively brain-dead bastards and he's the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. After all, Naruto has never catered to them or their preconceptions in the past. Years apart are unlikely to have given him cause, especially if he's been living in a community with 4 other Jinchuriki. It's also improbable that it's a personal threat, because Sasuke knows Naruto. It would simply force him out into the open, somewhere between epic showdown, handy distraction, and baiting. What he doesn't know is Uzushio's political climate, its detailed history, and potential dangers to it. That means we're back to square one. Sasuke holds back an angry huff and runs his fingers through his hair. At the very least, he knows what questions he'll ask when he confronts and/or corners Naruto. Sasuke's attention is drawn to a flash of color from below, and he performs a chakra-assisted bound from the roof, landing lightly in front of his old genin partner. "Sakura," he says, rising to his feet and looking her in the eyes with his best impression of Ino's lethal puppy eyes. Reactions to his expression range from laughter, Ino, to horror, Jiraiya, to deadpan disbelief, Shikamaru. Although it was an accident, Sasuke did not intend to give him that look, regardless of what Ino indicates. "Are you available? I require your assistance." Unlike in their genin days, when Sakura would have jumped at the chance to agree, or possibly used it as leverage to secure a date. Because Sakura has always been shockingly devious, Sakura is completely unimpressed. She gives him a blank glare, folding her arms across her chest and arching one politely incredulous brow as if she learnt it from her teacher. "Really?" she replies flatly. That is not an encouraging tone of voice from her. Nonetheless, Sasuke is a Konoha shinobi who refuses to give up even when the odds are stacked against him. He nods and continues. "Can you fill in for me at the mission assignment desk? I need to do some research." Sakura would have refused outright a week ago, dismissing it as yet another manifestation of Sasuke's preoccupation with locating Naruto. With the truth of Uzushio undeniable and a strong lead in the form of its ambassador and gods. But Sasuke looks back on his talk with Naruto in the marketplace and simply wants to laugh, because honestly, she gives him a thoughtful look and then narrows her eyes. If this is like that time with the brothel in Hot Springs Country, she warns Sasuke. "No," Sasuke says, appalled by the suggestion. "And why would you bring it up? I thought we agreed to never." "The word you're searching for is decreed, Sasuke. You declared that we would never discuss it again, and I recall not agreeing at any point during the conversation. But that isn't the point. If I'm going to have to bail you out again, Sasuke, your point is completely valid." For 3 months, Neji would not look at me without snickering. Neji, the Ice Prince. Do you realize how humiliating that is? Kiba still sniggers whenever someone mentions beeswax, and if this digging you're doing is going to leave me forever mentally traumatized, I think it's only right that I know ahead of time so I can brace myself. So there's a reason Sakura, more than any of the Konoha 12, is sick of Sasuke's never-ending search for Naruto. Sasuke crosses his arms, not defensively, mind you, and meets her gaze as squarely as he can while bracing himself for any incoming blows. Sakura has her fists on her hips and an attitude that threatens heavenly punishment if he fails to tell her the whole truth. In village, he promises, because he knows Naruto isn't going anyplace else now that Haku is gone. It's just gathering information. "That's what you said about the time with the mistress of the bird country daimyo," Sakura murmurs, but Sasuke pretends to be deaf in her direction for a little period. It's a reasonably effective strategy in general. Ino is the other jounin on shift, he says as a last-ditch effort to persuade. Sakura fights for another 7 seconds before succumbing with a sigh and a harsh roll of the eyes. "Wonderful," she mutters. "Awesome. We can commiserate about your lack of life and social skills." Sasuke grimaces, but that was to be anticipated. If he ever forgot about their mindless fangirl devotion. But then Sakura takes a step forward, lightly wraps her knuckles on the side of his head with a warm smile, and mutters, "Well, get moving, you jerk," and Sasuke recalls precisely why he doesn't. Because, as things currently stand, yeah, regardless of how much he complains, it's pretty much perfect. With a sharp HN to cover up any mushiness on his face, Sasuke jerks away, flips around, and leaps for the roofs again, ignoring his friend's laughter rising behind him. Tsunade leans against the big windows of her office, her head tipped to rest against the cold smoothness of the glass, watching the children play in the park. A group is playing tag, and another is grouped around a recognizable figure dressed in a Chunin vest. Tsunade can't help but smile at the sight of Sarutobi Konohamaru and his typical swarm of dedicated followers, recalling her trip back to Konoha with Naruto, and his bright smile, and boasts about how he'd taken on a minion who called him boss. Konohamaru has carried on his legacy, pranks and all, for nearly 7 years. However, Tsunade feels that, considering her ANBU's perpetual annoyance at their failure to apprehend the offender, Konohamaru isn't the only one causing trouble. She's not going to say anything about it. It's usually a good idea to keep them guessing. Tsunade adores Konoha, despite her vehement resentment of it. It's her home, but it's also a reminder of every loss she's ever experienced, from her parents to Nawaki to Naruto, just when she thought her curse could be broken. And maybe Naruto isn't dead. Maybe he's just gone as Sasuke believes, but Tsunade misses him. Misses the small child who mastered the Rasengan in a matter of days, mastered it, and then went on to face Orochimaru and give the Snake Sage pause. Misses his optimism, his smile, and the way he looked at her, the way Nawaki did, the way she's sure her and Dan's children would if they had the chance. Tsunade can't help but imagine Naruto somewhere kind right now, despite her stated skepticism, and tries to be fully realistic. Somewhere, they adore and appreciate him in ways that none of Konoha's inhabitants have managed to do more than a few times. She imagines a family for him, friends, and a home, and that makes her happy. It's good. She doesn't even have any papers left, due in part to Shizun's assistance in clearing out the final few stacks. After all, they're both eager for a night off. After a little pause and reluctance, Jiraiya walks inside the door. Tsunade arches her brow and pushes away from the glass because she can't recall the last time Jiraiya used a door instead of a window. He appears tired, worn but tense, his nerves vibrating with tension as he strides over to the desk, his geta clacking noisily in the quiet room. There are no visible bruises or restricted motions that indicate discomfort. But, Jiraiya, she asks, her voice Hokage sharp, because it's evident that this is her top jounin. Her spy master, not her colleague and childhood buddy. Jiraiya gives her a thin, wan smile but doesn't relax or unbend, despite the fact that he'd normally be sprawled all over the chair by now. Tsunade, he says again, I'm going to be out of town for a few days. The Chunin exams will be held for the first time in Konoha since the tragic invasion 7 years ago. True, Konoha is powerful, but so are the other nations, and given the world's current lack of open combat, all the stops will be pulled for this event. After all, it's a mostly harmless way to iron out certain conflicts, and a wonderful venue for cage grandstanding. Tsunade needs all of her jounin there, and she is about to open her lips to remind Jiraiya of this when he stops her, shaking his head. It's about Akatsuki, he says quietly, and she remains mute. I met with a contact who managed to penetrate their base this morning. With his information, I have enough to make a first move, and because their attention will be elsewhere for the time being, I must take the risk. Tsunade returns to her chair with a quiet sigh, falling into the comfortable but not comfortable armchair, and giving Jiraiya her entire attention as she steeples her fingers in front of her. It's not that straightforward, she points out. Jiraiya, we're already stretched to the limit in terms of manpower between preparing for the exams and carrying out normal tasks. I can't afford to send another jounin with you, and asking a Chunin, even one of the elites, to accompany you would be a death sentence. And you're not traveling alone. That would be suicidal. It's not surprising that Jiraiya doesn't seem fazed. Jiraiya has known her since they were both brats, and the thought of backup has never been acceptable to her. He simply waves his hand away, dismissing the thought and throwing her a grin that shouldn't be nearly as careless as it is. Don't worry, Haim, my informant will accompany me. As a shinobi, as a cage, Tsunade is well aware of the types of people who usually wind up selling information to the hidden villages, especially valuable, sensitive, and dangerous information like this, and they're usually either desperate for money or fishing for something. Furthermore, there is always the possibility that such material is incorrect, intentionally deceptive, or provided by the subject to lure Konoha into a trap. But no matter how well Tsunade understands it, Jiraiya understands it much better, and she can see it written into every line of his features. She often wonders how her life would be different if Jiraiya had just a normal amount of stubbornness instead of the inhuman amount he seemed to be endowed with. Do you believe them? Tsunade asks equally, and isn't that the million Ryo question? It's also a question that, in the shinobi world, is rarely answered with a yes. Jiraiya, you're going to face the Akatsuki. Do you believe this informant will have your back in that situation? Jiraiya pauses, ruminating on the situation. Tsunade is relieved that he's thinking about it, but he's scared that he won't be able to respond right away. Jiraiya finally grins. He smiles, but faintly and with something held back. It's warm, cheerful, and energetic, and Tsunade hasn't seen anything like it in years. Not since Naruto finished and mastered the Rasengan before disappearing. Yeah, he responds, looking her in the eyes. I have faith in him. Plus, I wouldn't want anyone else on this mission, Haim. Stealth will go us much further than breaking down the front door. Even I am not brave enough to go against the entire institution. We'll sneak in by a side entrance he knows when they're all inside, kill as many as we can before they raise the alarm, and then flee before they can respond. These are all S-Class nin, but I believe we can outmaneuver them if we work together and plan ahead of time. There aren't many people who could be an informant who has been inside the Akatsuki headquarters, who is powerful enough that Jiraiya feels confident going after 8 impossibly strong and ruthless shinobi with him, who Jiraiya trusts but not blindly, whose name he won't tell her, really. There aren't many people who could be. And Tsunade bites her lip in tight containment. Despite Orochimaru's evil, despite everything he's done, Tsunade can still read him. Their meeting 7 years ago, when he offered to bring Dan and Nawaki back, was genuine. Tsunade saw something of the young child afraid and outraged in the face of loss, who wanted to make everyone around him immortal so he wouldn't have to go through it again. People, including herself, always forget that beneath the monster is a man. A shinobi who served in 2 wars and was once one of Konoha's most powerful weapons. They treated him the same way they handled the rest of the Sannin. And while Tsunade had Dan to divert her, Jiraiya had the AIM orphans and then Minato's crew. Orochimaru, who was so remote and reserved, so smart that he was on a totally different level, had no one, partly by choice, but also because he was intimidating and cold, and so intimately associated with his snakes that no one dared to approach him. As a result, no one did. Yes, she despises him. He assassinated Sarutobi and attempted to destroy Konoha. He experimented on humans, slaughtered innocent people, and pretended to be God. But she adores him as well, the youngster he was and the man he became, the confidant and surrogate brother she lost so long ago. But maybe he's not completely lost, or at least not yet. Tsunade wants to stand up and depart with Jiraiya. Head off to wherever the Akatsuki are hiding, firmly positioned between Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Just the way she's supposed to be, to abandon all of her responsibilities and duties, as well as the low-level agony that Konoha brings, and simply go. Resurrect her squad, her family, from the ashes it's long been reduced to. Surely, not even Akatsuki will stand a chance against the 3 Sannin. There isn't a single thing that can stop them from being together as they were always intended to be. But she is the Hokage. Tsunade's face is carved into the mountain, staring down on the hamlet she is tasked with protecting. And if she has ever been anything, it is faithful. She's spent her entire life fighting and killing for her beliefs of peace, justice, and salvation. She's been devoted to Dan's memory and the love they shared for 30 years. She's been faithful to her village as only its figurehead can be for 7 years, and she couldn't quit that. Shizune and Sakura would most likely track her down and drag her back by her hair. Tsunade riffles through a cabinet for a mission form, fills out the appropriate facts totally by rote, and sends it off to Jiraiya with a faint, resigned, somewhat amused huff. When he tries to take it, she tightens her grip and forces him to look at her squarely. Just be safe, she begs. Each of you. For a brief instant, surprise flashes across his lined face before settling into a warm, affectionate understanding. Of course, he says, smiling. He will be back before you know it. It's what he used to say when they were kids. He and Orochimaru both handled her concerns with smiles and easy assurances, returning home 1,000 colors battered but yet going out before they healed completely. People often wonder why she's such a good medic nin. It's entirely because she had so much practice when she was younger. Tsunade sighs and hands back the paper, seeing Jiraiya scribble out the remainder of the information before accepting it and filing it away. Good luck, she adds, attempting to crack a smile. This specific shade of worried but hopeful and mostly resigned is out of practice, just as she is out of practice thinking of Jiraiya and Orochimaru the way they used to be, strength and brains, brashness and cunning, a team rather than mortal foes. Jiraiya gives her a salute and a cheeky wink before strolling back out the doors and into the rapidly fading light.
I will continue the series in the next part, so stay tuned. Till then, we weeb offline.